I recently moved into a new area, and my crazy neighbor tried to lie to me that she and her kids had unlimited access to my hot tub because that was the neighborhood's rules. When denied, she did it anyway. Then tried to steal all the water away, then poisoned the water when I kicked her out. The mountain air in this semi-rural region was exactly what I needed. At 35 years old, Bobby, a pragmatic software architect, had spent the last few years living under the crippling shadow of a professional betrayal. I had trusted a colleague who then torpedoed a major client relationship, leaving me with a sense of violation that went deeper than just money. My solution was simple: build a fortress. I needed order, control, and separation from the world's chaos. This secluded property, with its small house in the front and large yard, trailing into the mountainside, was perfect. The best feature, the crown jewel of my defense, was the natural hot spring. It was an in-ground tub, fed directly by a hot spring source, near my left neighbor's property. I often sat there in the evenings, watching the steam curl against the darkening pines, feeling the warmth seep into me, and believing, for the first time in years, that I was finally safe. This feeling was reinforced by the stream that ran through the back of my yard, nourishing the small fruit and pepper garden I planned to grow. It all felt idyllic, a controlled ecosystem where logic prevailed. The previous owners, however, had given me a strained, serious warning about my neighbor, Cenne, who lived next door. They mentioned lawsuits and general hostility, but I dismissed it. My rigidity often made me dismissive of what I saw as dramatic, emotional issues. Surely, if I just kept my boundaries firm and my interactions purely transactional, everything would be fine. This bubble of false security popped on a Tuesday afternoon. I was unpacking when 3 children, maybe 8, 9, and 10 years old, appeared on my porch holding a plate of slightly scorched chocolate chip cookies. They were Cenne's kids. "Welcome to the neighborhood," the oldest chirped. I invited them and their mother over for a small barbecue later that week. They seemed sweet, and I thought, see, the former owners were exaggerating. People are decent. That evening, the moment Cenne, a woman in her 40s with sharp, demanding eyes, stepped through my front door, she began explaining the rules of the neighborhood. At first, it was normal stuff. Keep noise down after 9 o'clock. Park cars in driveways. My logical mind approved. Then, she reached the hot springs and the stream. She stated, with absolute authority, that all the kids were allowed to play every part of the stream. Private backyards. And that all neighbors had unlimited access to each other's hot springs. Since I had the only active hot spring on the street, I was immediately taken aback. I interrupted her, forcing myself to maintain a measured, even tone. "I appreciate the welcome, Cenne, but I am not comfortable with those rules. My property is private." She scoffed, a quick, dismissive sound that was instantly infuriating. "All the neighbors are fine with it, Bobby. It's just how we do things here." "I am still not comfortable with it," I repeated, feeling the familiar tightening knot in my chest. I had to hold the line. My space was mine. She completely ignored me, continuing with a long list of questionable rules. The rest of the evening was a tense blur. Over the next few days, I spoke to my other neighbors. J. Miller, the laid-back outdoor guide living to my right, was the first to confirm my suspicions. J., a chill guy who had built small pools fed by the stream, laughed dryly. Cenne. Her rules are total bull. Just steer clear. Man. She's trouble. I went over to Cenne's house and, armed with the knowledge that I had the community's quiet backing, I told her again that I was uncomfortable with anyone in my backyard without my permission. She just shrugged and said, "Okay." The calmness in her voice was unnerving. Later, Jay explained exactly who Cenne was. A serial suer. She was known in the small community for suing anyone and everyone, including a local pizza chain. She drove into debt over a peanut allergy claim that almost everyone believed was fabricated. She was manipulative and always had a lawyer on speed dial. This wasn't a neighbor dispute, it was a siege. My fortress was already under attack, not by logic, but by a consuming, irrational force. I decided right then and there I would never speak to her or her family again, prioritizing self-preservation above all else. But that resolution lasted less than 1 week. 687 words. The brief conversation with Jay confirmed every gut instinct I had. The world wasn't done trying to take control. And now I knew exactly what I was up against. Knowing Cenne was a serial suer only reinforced my belief that my emotional fortress had to be more than just physical walls. It needed an active defense system. I settled into a grim routine of avoidance and hyper-vigilance, expecting a legal threat. What I got was far more brazen and immediate. It was exactly 1 week later. I pulled into my driveway after a quick trip to the grocery store. The sun was high, and the day was perfectly quiet until I looked toward the backyard. My heart gave a sickening lurch. The heavy, customized lid that covered the hot spring, a lid I knew, for a fact, took 2 fully grown adults to lift, was slid haphazardly off the spring, and inside, splashing loudly, were Cenne's 3 children. A jolt of pure, cold anger, mixed with the professional anxiety that always surfaced when my boundaries were violated. Pools and hot tubs are dangerous, and the liability was terrifying. But more than that, this was a deliberate, entitled breach of the explicit rule I had laid down. I marched into the backyard. "You need to get out of there. Right now," I ordered, keeping my voice low but firm, focusing on the danger rather than the trespass. The children paused their splashing. They looked at me with fear, but with an entitlement that mirrored their mother's scoff. "Mom said, it's ours," the oldest boy declared, resting his arms on the edge of the tub. "She said we can use it whenever we want." "Your mom is wrong," I countered. "This is private property. You are trespassing. Leave my yard immediately." They stood their ground for a moment longer, clearly told to resist. It was a bizarre, high-stakes standoff with 3 elementary schoolers over a hot tub. Finally, maybe sensing the seriousness in my tone, they clambered out, dripping water onto the surrounding stone, and slowly, reluctantly shuffled out of the yard. I sped back to the hardware store, my mind racing. I needed physical barriers, not just polite requests. I bought heavy-duty locks for the gates and returned within the hour. As I was attaching the first lock to the back gate, Cenne materialized from her yard, her face tight with manufactured outrage. "Why?" she demanded, planting her hands on her hips. "Did you kick my children out of the hot tub? You know the rules." "I know your version of the rules, which are entirely fabricated," I replied, not looking up from the lock I was securing. "You are trespassing, and I told you, my yard is private. Leave immediately." "You can't do that." "This is a communal resource," she shrieked. I finally looked up, meeting her gaze, and uttered the only defensive maneuver I had at the time. "I have security cameras, Cenne. They are recording right now. Every minute, every word, every step on my property." It was a bluff. I had not installed the cameras yet, but the word, recording, stopped her cold. She cursed at me for a minute or two, loudly, venomously, before she finally stomped back to her house. That evening, I didn't just order the locks. I ordered a full security camera system from Amazon, making sure to purchase one with a high-definition recording capacity. I needed a factual, irrefutable defense. My desire for order was now focused entirely on documenting the chaos. The next couple of weeks were unsettlingly quiet on the physical front, but I felt her eyes constantly. I spent days replanting my garden by the stream, moving my precious pepper plants from my old apartment balcony. Cenne spent that time peering over the fence, complaining about the color of my fence, the height of my trees, and what I was doing with the stream water. Jay, bless his easygoing heart, came over occasionally and, without fail, would yell across the fence, "Go find your own damn hobby, Cenne." He was starting to confront his fear of conflict. A small win for the neighborhood. 3 weeks after the hot tub incident, I had to leave for 3 days for a friend's wedding. I was filled with dread about leaving my newly fortified home. My worst fears were confirmed by my phone. I kept getting constant security alerts, motion detected in my backyard. Checking the footage, I saw Cenne's children playing in the garden area. They weren't just playing, they were running and trampling my dear shishito peppers. It was an act of pure, pointless spite directed by their mother. I texted Jay, "Get them out, please. She's telling them to ruin my garden." Jay, now fully committed to my defense, chased the kids off. I didn't call the police. The children were being manipulated, and the police wouldn't do anything about just some kids trampling plants. But I had a deep, sinking feeling that the next escalation would not be petty trespass. It would be monumental. I just didn't know how right I was. The breach of protocol was over. The systematic theft was about to begin. 984 words. I thought the physical barriers were enough. But Cenne proved that a true invasion wasn't just about crossing a line. It was about stealing the source of life itself. I was driving home, about 1 hour out from the city, feeling tired, but relieved the wedding trip was over. The only comfort was the thought of my fortress standing strong. Then my phone buzzed again. Another motion alert. I ignored it for a while, assuming it was just the kids again. But curiosity gnawed at me. When I stopped for gas, I checked the camera feed. What I saw wasn't just trespassing. It was a professional job. The footage showed Cenne, her face contorted with intense focus, standing over a team of plumbers. They were actively installing piping, connecting a line directly from the hot spring source, which was near the property line, into her own yard. She wasn't asking for access, she was trying to steal the water. The brazenness of the theft. Committing a felony with hired workers in broad daylight took my breath away. It was a systematic, calculated violation of the boundary I valued most. I immediately sent the saved footage to Jay and called him. Jay rushed over, furious. He yelled at the plumbing team, telling them they were on private property and had no authorization to work. But they shook him off, saying they had been hired by the homeowner and weren't listening to an intermediary. Jay, confronting his own discomfort with conflict, was powerless. By the time I called the non-emergency police line, the team was wrapping up. I drove like a maniac, fueled by a rage that felt frighteningly unfamiliar. When I arrived, the plumbing team was just walking out of the gate, leaving behind a broken lock lying on the ground. The two officers were already there, talking to the workers. I jumped out of my car. "I am the homeowner," I announced, cutting through the confusion. "I did not hire these men. They are trespassing. And they just destroyed my gate lock and attempted to steal my water supply." The plumbers looked confused, glancing at Cenne, who was now hovering by her fence. They claimed they had been hired by the homeowner and produced a work order signed by a neighbor. The police asked them to wait and turned to me. I led the officers into the backyard. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the desperate need to restore order. I saw the cheap, unsecured piping running across the ground from my hot spring source. A physical violation of my land. I walked straight to my shed, grabbed Ivor's crowbar, and went to work. "I am removing this right now," I told the officers, my voice tight. The metallic clang of the crowbar hitting the plastic pipe was loud and satisfying. I ripped the piping out of the ground, dirt flying. That was the signal for Cenne to activate her final defense. She shrieked, pressing her head over the fence. "Stop! Stop destroying my private property. I will sue you! We have a contract." The officers were now truly baffled, looking from the raging woman to the man methodically demobbing the unauthorized plumbing. Cenne then waved a piece of paper in the air. "I have a contract with the owner of this house to have their hot spring water. I paid $2 per month." She wouldn't hand the document over, only displaying it like a prize. The police ultimately left, warning me not to destroy the piping, as the contract made the situation a civil matter. I waited until their car was gone, then used the crowbar to rip up the small pipe that connected to the source, ensuring no water could possibly flow to her side. "I'll see you in court, Bobby," she screamed from her yard. I didn't flinch. I had the footage, the broken lock, and a lawyer on speed dial. I sent all the information to my lawyer, who called me back within the hour, completely unfazed. "Cenne has no case whatsoever," my lawyer assured me. "The signature is clearly not yours. It'll be easy to prove forgery. She's just trying to intimidate you." I felt the familiar of relying on logic and documentation to defend myself. I knew I would be served soon, but for the first time, I wasn't scared of the legal threat. The terror had given way to empowerment. I was angry, yes, but that anger was now focused. Cenne had escalated the war to a whole new level of illegal audacity. I was ready to push back. I needed a way to restore my peace, and until the legal process caught up, I decided my backyard fortress was going to be my personal theater of war. 1230, 7 words. If the pipes were about control, the poison was about pure, unadulterated malice. She wasn't just targeting me anymore. She was targeting life itself. The exhilaration from ripping out. The illegal piping faded quickly, replaced by a cold, abiding fury. The confrontation had been cathartic, but my garden, my small, personal piece of natural order, was still suffering from the repeated trampling. Now I felt compelled to use the hot spring, not just for relaxation, but as an active tool of psychological warfare. I spent long, deliberately loud evenings soaking in the hot tub. I would talk to myself at volume, listing all the reasons I loved my property and, specifically, the hot spring. Oh, the therapeutic minerals in this water. I'd exclaim, loud enough to carry over the fence. This is the best natural hot spring in the entire neighborhood. I feel so relaxed and lucky to have this all to myself. Every few minutes, I'd hear a frustrated growl or the slamming of a door from Cenne's side, and the sound was sweeter than any music. It was petty, certainly, but after the pipe incident, I felt entirely justified in finding creative, legal ways to annoy her. I recently moved into a new area, and my crazy neighbor tried to lie to me that she and her kids had unlimited access to my hot tub, because that was the neighborhood's rules. When denied, she did it anyway. Then tried to steal all the water away, then poisoned the water when I kicked her out. The sheer scope of that statement, the summation of her escalating malice, felt like my new reality. The peace of my petty revenge didn't last. One morning I noticed my garden was wilting faster than was naturally possible. The leaves of my peppers were scorched and browning, and the fruit was shriveling. It wasn't just drying out. It was dying at an accelerated, unnatural rate. I heard a commotion in Cenne's yard. I crept to the fence line and peeked over. What I saw sent a spike of pure adrenaline through me, immediately wiping away all my cool, analytic detachment. Cenne was standing near the communal stream that ran through the backyards of the neighborhood. This was the stream that everyone used for their gardens and small nature pools. She was slowly, methodically pouring a massive, opaque jug of liquid into the flowing water. It didn't smell like bleach, but whatever it was clearly caustic. Her face was set in a tight mask of satisfaction, like a scientist successfully completing a malicious experiment. I knew instantly she was polluting the water. She was punishing me for defending my boundaries by attacking the shared resource that watered my garden. This wasn't just a threat to my property. It was a threat to the entire ecosystem we shared. My logical mind clicked into emergency mode. I rushed inside, grabbed my phone, and called Jay. Cenne just poured a ton of chemicals into the stream, I said, skipping all preamble. She's trying to kill my plants, but it waters everyone's yards. Do not use your pools. Warn everyone. Jay was horrified. He immediately started contacting the other neighbors. We quickly learned that one neighbor, who also had a garden, had already begun removing her plants from the soil near the stream just in case. The consensus was clear: Cenne had gone too far. This wasn't just about a hot tub anymore. Jay, having fully shed his fear of confrontation, offered to use a large drum he had in his garage to temporarily divert and remove the water from the stream, if we could get the neighbors to agree. His dog often played near the stream, adding a layer of personal urgency. 2 neighbors besides Jay agreed to the plan. One neighbor, whose 2 sons often played near the water, had a better idea. Damming the stream higher up, at the outlet of the moderately sized creek it branched off from. It was a small, 2-foot wide stream, and they felt a makeshift dam of wood and rocks would suffice. I rushed to the store to buy water testing kits, pH and nitrate tests. While I didn't know exactly what Cenne had used, I knew any drastic change in the water's chemical composition would be evidence. Later that evening, the good neighbor's kids successfully dammed the stream. It wasn't perfect, but the flow was drastically reduced, and the remaining water was quickly absorbed by the soil before it reached our yards. Jay and I tested the stagnant water remaining in his pools. The results were damning. The pH was a full 0.9 lower than the creek water upstream from Cenne's house. Nitrates were higher, and dissolved oxygen was significantly lower. It wasn't just water, it was an environmental hazard. The next day, a piece of damning information slipped out. The makeshift dam had broken, and Cenne was already complaining to another neighbor about me being a jerk for not letting her kids use the hot spring. In her rant, she let it slip that she had poured asana vinegar into the stream as justice. She confirmed her act of malice. I collected all the evidence: the security footage of the piping, the footage of the pouring, the water test results, and the neighbor's testimony. I bypassed the police this time and sent the entire package to a local environmental charity with strong ties to environmental protection agencies. I decided my revenge on Cenne needed to be proportional to her crime, a serious legal consequence, not just petty annoyance. Still, the piping was sitting in my yard. I needed to send one more message, a final, deliberate jab before the legal hammer fell. The pipes had to go back, one piece at a time. 1,207 words. The petty revenge was a needed distraction. But the true confrontation was always going to be the wedding, the ultimate weapon of social warfare Cenne had handed me. I decided to channel my frustration into my piping delivery plan. I called the owner of a local copy and delivery shop, explained the situation, and he found the entire scheme hilarious. He agreed to supply the boxes and plastic baggies and to deliver every single piece of piping individually, spread out over a long period, requiring a signature for each package. It was an exercise in calculated logistical annoyance, my specialty. I spent an hour pulling up the rest of the cheap plastic piping, separating every curve, every straight section, and every coupling into its own small package. I paid the shop owner extra for the effort. I watched from down the street as the first delivery was made to Cenne's house. Her husband answered the door. He called Cenne, who came out, signed the delivery sheet, took the tiny package containing a single corner pipe piece, and stormed back inside. She immediately went up to her second-story window and glared at me, a silent burning hatred that was, frankly, entertaining. Working from home had its advantages. The deliveries continued, 2 more pieces arriving that afternoon. After the 3rd delivery, Cenne snapped. She stormed over to my house, banging hard on the front door. I quickly grabbed my phone and started recording the front door camera feed. Before opening the door, careful to leave the threshold blocked by the door itself. I wasn't dumb enough to let her inside.
You are awful!
She shrieked, her voice high and unstable. You have to keep those pipes installed. It's my property. We have a contract. There is no legal contract, I stated, keeping my tone flat and controlled. Your lawyer knows that, and mine does too. You attempted theft and forgery. Now, please leave my property. When I mentioned the forgery, she began screaming a string of incoherent, high-volume curses. I quietly stepped inside for a second, closing the door only enough to call the police. On the non-emergency line, informing them I had a neighbor aggressively banging on my door and trespassing. Cenne continued, banging until a police car drove down the street. I opened the door and told the officers I wanted her off my property immediately and permanently. They relayed the message, and instantly, Cenne dropped the rage and adopted a melodramatic, hurt old lady act, claiming I was harassing her. For the record, she was only in her 40s. Then, she escalated the lie, claiming I had burned her youngest child in the hot tub and I was luring kids in. I showed the police the security camera footage of her kids trespassing and her previous confrontations. The officers, clearly seeing they were dealing with a crazy neighbor, asked her to come to the station with them. I assumed she had made a false report, which would only add to her mounting legal troubles. After the police left, Cenne returned to her house and resumed her vigil at the top window, staring. I closed the blinds. To my absolute surprise, she crossed the street to the hill opposite my house, found a slope, and stared through my front living room window, which didn't have blinds. I watched, amused, as she attempted to get a better angle, tripped backward over a small runoff ditch, landed squarely on her rear end, and let out an ungodly shriek of pure humiliation and pain, before storming back inside. It had stopped being scary, it had become high-grade entertainment. The biggest, most complex confrontation, however, was still brewing: the wedding. Cenne's son, from a teenage pregnancy, before her current marriage, was getting married. Through a strange turn of events, Cenne had tried to manipulate the bride, Audrey Hayes, into using her house for the bachelorette party by promising a natural, healing hot spring. Lying that it was in her yard. Audrey had declined Cenne's house, but had taken the bait regarding the hot spring. This was the motive for the pipe theft. When the piping plan failed, Cenne, in desperation, simply told Audrey and the groom that my house and backyard had the hot spring, and volunteered it without my consent. I learned all this after receiving a mysterious wedding invitation in the mail. Not for me, but clearly meant to be distributed, and seeing a handwritten on the back thanking me for volunteering my house for the bachelorette party. I called her husband. He was audibly surprised when I told him the names of the bride and groom. He admitted the groom was Cenne's son. I decided to bypass them entirely, and called the groom's biological father, who was immensely grateful for the warning. He explained that Cenne had been an absent mother who was trying to worm her way back in for the wedding. I had a moment of clarity, realizing the ultimate revenge wasn't just defending my property. It was disrupting her social machinations. I offered the groom's dad a deal. I would host the bachelorette party for free, with 2 rules. No damage and clean up everything. The catch: Cenne had to be blocked at the door of the wedding itself, despite her invitation. My invitation to the wedding, I told him, still stood. The groom's dad agreed to discuss it with the bride, Audrey. Audrey, intent on a wholesome family wedding, was initially supportive of letting Cenne attend. But the seeds of doubt, planted by Cenne's lies and my generous offer, had taken root. I knew the wedding itself, the ultimate social showdown, was where this conflict would reach its boiling point. 1230. 1 words. The silence after the bridal party was the calm before the storm. I knew Cenne wouldn't accept defeat. But even I didn't foresee the pure, unadulterated madness that would follow. The days leading up to the wedding were thick with anticipation. Cenne continued her staring campaign. I'd catch her silhouette through the blinds, perched by her fence, watching me. Whenever I stepped outside, her hatred was a tangible thing, a low-frequency hum of malice that I had learned to tune out, or perhaps, ironically, even enjoy. It was proof that my calculated psychological warfare, the tiny deliveries, the loud hot tub soaking, was working. On Friday, things escalated. A police car pulled into Cenne's driveway and stayed for a significant amount of time before leaving. I didn't know if it was related to the environmental agency I'd contacted about the stream poisoning or one of her previous false reports, but her staring intensified after the car left. She was wounded and therefore more dangerous. The bridal party was scheduled for Saturday evening. Midday. I knock on the door from a professional event setup crew. I called the groom's dad, who confirmed they were the right people, and I let them into the backyard. They set up beautiful, expensive furniture and twinkling lights. I watched, slightly detached, as my fortress transformed into a festive, temporary haven for 20 or so high-spirited bridesmaids. I stayed inside mostly, working at my desk. Cenne spent the afternoon pressed against her fence, a gargle of envy. I didn't care. I was protected by the presence of dozens of people and my security cameras. The bridesmaids, wealthy and overwhelmingly kind, were generous. As the evening progressed, I occasionally brought out cartons of ice cream, and by the time the party wound down, I had accumulated well over $3,000 in tips. A surreal, unexpected payoff. Cenne couldn't let it go. Around 9 o'clock, she started a campfire in her backyard. There was no wind, so the smoke mostly stayed in her yard. But the intent was clear: smoke out the party. When that failed, she grabbed her hose, ostensibly to put out the fire, and, accidentally, sprayed water repeatedly over the fence in the direction of the party. The bridesmaids simply laughed, turning it into part of the entertainment. Around 11 o'clock, the party packed up, and the bride, Audrey, handed me a card signed by all of them, thanking me profusely and including an additional $2,000 in tips. They were incredibly nice people, utterly unlike Cenne. I felt a genuine sense of connection to these strangers, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself in years. I went to bed, exhausted and content, assuming the climax of the conflict would occur the next day, at the wedding itself. I was wrong. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for the following morning. I was up early, making coffee, when my phone buzzed with an update from a mutual friend who was attending the ceremony. The friend was relaying a quick play-by-play. Cenne, in a stunningly entitled move, had shown up at the wedding venue, dressed in a bright, crisp white gown, a dress far too close to the bride's own, and demanded to be let in. Security, alerted by the groom's father, denied her. She tried to push past the guard, causing that the friend had to step away from momentarily. Just as I was reading that message, I heard an aggressive banging on my front door. It was Cenne. I checked the peephole. Her face was red, her eyes wild. She had clearly raced home immediately, after being turned away from the wedding. I started recording my doorbell camera, ready to call the police again. She tried the knob. I froze. I had been getting groceries just before, reading the wedding update, and in my rush, I had accidentally left the door unlocked. The knob turned. The door swung open. Cenne was standing in my foyer inside my house. The sudden, terrifying reversal of control shattered my hard-won sense of security. The trauma of my past betrayal, the violation of my trust in space, flooded back in a sickening wave. This was no longer just about property. It was about the physical violation of my safe place, my fortress. I dropped my phone and immediately started running up the stairs. 1,009 words. She crossed the line I had sworn she never would. All the pipe ripping, all the petty mail, all the lawsuits. It all faded away when she stepped over my threshold. The violation was absolute, and a cold clarity rushed through me, overriding the shock. I had run upstairs, but I wasn't running away. I was securing a tactical advantage. I raced to the landing, phone now in hand, and called 911, relaying the information in short, clipped sentences. My neighbor, Cenne, just broke into my house. She is inside right now. I am upstairs. I need police immediately. Cenne was screaming my name from the base of the stairs.
Bubby, you can't do this. That contract is real? You owe me that water.
Where are the pipes? I want the pipes back. She started ascending the stairs. I planted my feet firmly on the wooden landing, ready to defend, the last bastion of my safe space. I tried to sound rational even as panic hammered against my ribs.
Get out of my house, Cenne! The police are on their way!
You are trespassing and breaking and entering. She reached the top step. Her face was unrecognizable, a mask of pure, unbridled fury drawn taut from her social failures at the wedding and her mounting legal peril. My pragmatism, my focus on order, made me a target for her chaos. She lunged. Before I could even raise my arm, she lashed out and slapped me hard across the face. The sting was immediate, sharp, and intensely humiliating. The physical assault, the violation of my body inside my fortress, was the final, unforgivable breach. The shock gave way to a primal, explosive need for self-defense. My fear vanished, replaced by a searing adrenaline-fueled rage. I screamed at her.
Get out! Get out of my house!
She drew her arm back, ready to strike again. I grabbed her wrist, twisting it hard. She let out an ungodly shriek of pain, stumbling backward. I used my full weight, dragging her across the landing, past the stairs, and toward the front door. I didn't care about anything but getting her out. I was a software architect, not a brawler, but at that moment, I was a man defending his sanctuary.
Let go of me.
You're assaulting me, she wailed, reversing her accusation, falling back on her old tactic of projecting guilt. I wrenched the front door open and dragged her, struggling and screaming, out onto the porch and down the steps. She landed hard on the driveway pavement, just as two police cars sped down the street. Their sirens mercifully brief as they pulled up to my house. The officers jumped out and immediately assessed the scene. Me, standing over a woman lying on the ground, both of us breathing heavily, and my front door still wide open. Cenne instantly snapped back into her melodrama. She started weeping, pointing at me. He assaulted me. He lured my children with his hot tub. He burned my child. The officers ignored her theatrics and focused on me. What is going on, sir? She broke into my house, I said, my voice shaking from the exertion, but steady in its accusation. I was on the phone with 911. She physically assaulted me. I pointed to the red mark beginning to bloom across my cheek. They immediately detained Cenne and helped me back inside. I showed them the video footage from the doorbell camera confirming that she had forced entry, which negated all her false claims. The police interviewed me, confirming the breaking and entering and the assault. After about 15 minutes, they placed Cenne in the back of a patrol car. I watched numbly as they drove her away. The physical violation was terrifying, but the outcome was absolute victory. My fight had been justified, documented, and decisively ended. Right after the police left, my phone rang. It was my friend from the wedding. He finished his relay of events, telling me Cenne had been physically turned away from the venue, dressed in her inappropriate white gown. That rage, that final humiliation, was the catalyst. She had driven straight to my house. For the physical climax of her defeat, Cenne was not back within the hour. I assumed she was being held or perhaps for bail. I was shaken, still processing the feeling of her hand striking my face. But underneath it all was a profound sense of relief. I had defended my fortress, physically and legally, and the unjust chaos had finally met the structure of the law. 1,027 words. The hot spring finally felt clean, but Cenne's chaos, as I would soon discover, wasn't something a court order or a jail cell could truly contain. In the immediate aftermath of the assault and her arrest, the peace was astonishing. Cenne did not return that day. The updates I received from my lawyer were swift and satisfying, based on the security footage and the severity of the breaking. Combined with the physical assault, Cenne was potentially facing a sentence north of 3 years, along with a significant fine and mandatory community service. I immediately filed a restraining order, formally establishing the boundary I fought so hard to create. I knew that assaulting me had rattled me more than I cared to admit. The violation was personal, echoing the professional trauma that had made me crave isolation in the first place. I needed to reset the emotional balance. That Saturday, I grilled food and hosted a good portion of the neighborhood. Jay came, as did the neighbor whose kids had helped build the dam, and a few others. We talked. We laughed, and for the first time, my fortress felt like a sanctuary, a place where people came together for mutual defense and support, not exploitation. Later that night, I went into the hot spring. The steam curled around me, not as a barrier, but as a calming envelope. The water was mine, and the peace was earned. The conflict with Cenne, however, had a long tail. 5 months later, well into the Thanksgiving holiday season, Cenne's malice refaced, this time directed not at me, but at the entire community. Cenne and her husband went on vacation to California. Rather than arrange proper childcare, she left her 3 children, the same ones who had trampled my peppers, on the doorstep of Donna, one of my very nice neighbors who occasionally babysat. Cenne left an envelope with $50 to cover 2 weeks of care, claiming Donna had agreed to watch them. The problem was, Donna'd. Her entire family were out of state for the holiday. Cenne's kids were left outside in the cold rain for hours before another neighbor noticed them. The kids insisted Donna was expecting them, citing a misunderstanding. To avoid involving the government, the neighbors brought the children around until a newer family reluctantly agreed to take them in. Donna was furious, confirming she had explicitly told Cenne she could not babysit, and that there was no deal. I watched as the neighborhood struggled with its internal conflict. They hated Cenne, but they also hated the idea of involving child protective services, believing it would be cruel to the kids or would reflect poorly on the tight-knit community. This was the final piece of my emotional arc. In my past, I had avoided conflict and external help, leading to my exploitation. Now, I saw the neighbors doing the same thing, protecting a deadbeat parent out of misguided compassion. I realized that some chaos requires the structure of external justice. I spoke with Jay. She abandoned them. Jay, this isn't a misunderstanding. You can't protect her anymore. Though I didn't tell anyone, I finally called the local authorities. I was relieved to learn that someone else had beaten me to it. When Cenne finally responded to the police's call, she tried one last manipulation. She sent old screenshots of a conversation where Donna had vague offered to watch the kids for $2,000, but had explicitly said she wasn't sure and not to count on it. Cenne played it off as a massive holiday-induced misunderstanding, and the police, satisfied she had responded and the children were safe, dropped the investigation. She escaped the child abandonment charge, paying the new family $1,000 to keep the kids for the remaining time. A cheap price for avoiding jail. Yet, despite this frustrating final failure of justice, my own closure was complete. Cenne had been neutralized where it mattered most, my home. She was no longer a personal threat, but simply a fact of the chaotic world I had learned to manage. I no longer feared the breach. I had learned that protecting my peace meant not just building walls, but knowing when to open the doors for help and when to let the law handle the truly unhinged chaos. 569 words.